My name is Melissa Carter, and I'm 29 years old. 6 months into carrying triplets, a pregnancy my husband and I had chased through 2 rounds of exhausting fertility treatment, I thought I understood every possible way this journey could test us. I thought I'd already survived the hardest parts: the injections, the waiting, the fear of loss in those first fragile weeks. I was wrong, because on the night, my body decided those babies were coming early and coming fast. The person who was supposed to be standing beside me had made a very different choice about where he needed to be. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the man I married, and about what I was willing to accept from him. The cramping started just after 9 on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, low and tightening in a way that felt different from the Braxton Hicks I'd grown used to. Within 20 minutes, I was doubled over the bathroom sink, watching blood spread across the white tile in a way that made my whole body go cold with a fear I'd never experienced before, not even during the fertility treatments. My mother, who'd been staying with us for the final stretch of the pregnancy, drove me to the hospital, her hands visibly shaking on the wheel, while I called my husband Ryan over and over from the passenger seat. Straight to voicemail, every single time. His cheerful, outgoing message, playing on a loop that felt increasingly obscene, given what was happening in my body. By the time we reached the emergency room, a nurse was already wheeling me back on a gurney, rattling off words like placental abruption and emergency delivery in a tone that made the hallway lights feel too bright, too clinical. Another nurse slid a consent form onto a clipboard in front of me, explaining quickly that the babies needed to come out now, that every additional minute of waiting increased the risk to all 3 of them and to me. There was no time left to wait for a signature that wasn't mine to give. I signed that form with a trembling hand, blood soaking through the thin hospital gown beneath me, my mother gripping my other hand tightly, because the one person legally supposed to be standing there instead had simply, inexplicably vanished. I kept thinking, even as they wheeled me down the hallway toward the operating room, fluorescent lights sliding past overhead, that surely he'd call back any second, that surely there was some reasonable explanation for the silence. Maybe his phone had died, maybe he was driving somewhere without service. I ran through every generous possibility I could invent, needing desperately to believe in one of them. I didn't yet know how long I'd actually be waiting for that call, or how thoroughly unreasonable the real explanation would turn out to be once I finally heard it. Looking back now, I can see clearly the cracks I'd spent months quietly stepping over, telling myself they didn't matter. Ryan and his ex-girlfriend, Danielle, had stayed friends since before he and I ever met. A friendship he insisted was harmless, entirely platonic, nothing worth discussing or worrying about. Throughout my pregnancy, as my body grew heavier and my energy grew thinner, I noticed how quickly he still responded to her texts, sometimes faster than he responded to mine. I noticed how he'd laugh at something on his phone screen and simply say, "It's just Danielle," when I asked, his tone implying I was being unreasonable even for wondering. I noticed how her birthday had somehow become a fixture on our shared calendar, the same way our own anniversary was, a date he never forgot, never needed reminding of. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself that jealousy over an ex-girlfriend was beneath me, that trusting my husband mattered more than policing his phone or his friendships. I ignored the small, persistent feeling in my chest that something about that particular friendship took up more space in our marriage than it reasonably should have. Addressing it directly felt like starting a fight I simply didn't have the energy for, while growing 3 human beings inside my body, managing swollen ankles and sleepless nights, and a body that no longer felt entirely mine. So I let it go, again and again, choosing peace over confrontation, never imagining exactly what that choice would eventually cost me. The operating room doors swung shut behind me, and my mother was left standing alone in a hallway that suddenly felt enormous, calling Ryan's phone every 10 minutes with no success at all. A nurse approached her gently, asking where my husband was, glancing down at the emergency contact sheet, where his name sat uselessly beside a phone number that simply rang and rang into nothing, never once going through. My mother, listed as the backup contact, stepped forward instead, scrubbing in with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, preparing to be the one holding my hand through major surgery meant in every normal circumstance for a spouse. Minutes stretched into 1 hour, then 2. The waiting room filling with the particular suffocating dread of not knowing. My sister arrived partway through to sit beside my mother, both of them staring at silent phones, refreshing nothing, willing a call to come through that never did. Nurses passed by periodically, with careful, professional expressions that gave nothing away. And every time the automatic doors opened, my mother's head snapped up, hoping, before sinking back down into disappointment when it wasn't Ryan walking through them. While I was under anesthesia, entirely unaware of any of it, delivering 3 children into the world without the one hand I'd expected and needed to be gripping mine, Ryan was 30 minutes away at Danielle's 31st birthday dinner, at a candlelit table with a group of her friends, phone switched fully off and tucked deliberately into his jacket pocket. He wanted to be fully present for her, as he'd apparently announced to the table before silencing it. A small gesture of consideration he'd extend to an ex-girlfriend that he had, somewhere along the way, stopped extending to his own pregnant wife. He tried to explain it later, clumsily, about how he thought turning it off for just a few hours couldn't possibly matter, how he never imagined anything urgent could happen in that exact window of time. He raised a glass to a woman who wasn't his wife, laughing at some story down the table, while his actual wife bled through emergency surgery to bring his own 3 children into the world entirely alone, surrounded by nurses and machines, and her own frightened mother instead of him. 3 hours after the babies were born, all 3 healthy, all 3 finally stable in the NICU, Ryan finally turned his phone back on to 11 missed calls and a string of texts growing more frantic with each one. He called my mother first, panic flooding his voice the moment she picked up. And she told him flatly, without softening a single word, that he had 3 healthy children he hadn't been there to meet, and a wife who'd nearly bled out signing consent papers completely without him. He arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, still wearing the shirt he'd worn to Danielle's dinner, cologne still faintly clinging to him. And by the time he reached my recovery room, I was already awake, already holding one of our daughters against my chest, already entirely, coldly clear on exactly where he'd been. He started explaining before he'd even fully stepped into the room, words stumbling out fast about losing track of time, about not thinking anything could possibly go wrong in just a few hours, about how sorry he was, how scared he'd been once he finally saw his phone. I let him finish completely, watching him carefully the entire time before I spoke. "You didn't lose track of time, Ryan," I said, my voice steady despite everything my body had just endured. "You turned your phone off on purpose, for Danielle's birthday, the same week I was due to deliver high-risk triplets. You knew the risk. I signed the papers that could have killed me completely alone, and you weren't even reachable." My mother, standing quietly near the window, said nothing at all, but her expression made it entirely clear whose side she'd already chosen, and had likely chosen hours ago. Ryan's excuses grew visibly smaller with every sentence. His justification about just being present for an ex-girlfriend sounding more indefensible each time he repeated some version of it in that recovery room. By the next morning, my sister had already told the rest of the family exactly what happened, sparing no detail, and any sympathy Ryan might have hoped to receive had evaporated entirely before he even had the chance to ask for it. He tried apologizing again that afternoon, softer this time, promising it would never happen again, promising Danielle meant absolutely nothing compared to me and our children. I looked at him, holding one of our sons awkwardly, unfamiliar with the weight of him, a son he'd very nearly missed meeting altogether, and I felt something inside me settle with total, unshakable clarity. "I don't need you to promise anything," I told him. "I need you to understand There's no version of this marriage where I accept being an afterthought during the single most dangerous night of my life. I needed you, and you chose to be unreachable for a party. 2 weeks later, once I was strong enough to be discharged with all 3 babies healthy, gaining weight, and thriving, I made my decision clear to everyone, including myself. I wasn't interested in counseling built around convincing myself his choice that night was somehow forgivable, or explainable, or simply a lapse in judgment I should learn to overlook. I moved into my mother's house temporarily with my 3 children, filed for divorce within the month, and felt something lighten in my chest with every single step further away from a marriage that had shown me, with total clarity, exactly where I ranked on the one night it mattered most. Lying awake now with 3 sleeping babies beside me, their small breathing the only sound in the room, I understand something I wish I trusted sooner. The moments you're most vulnerable reveal exactly who someone really is, without excuses, without explanations, without any room left for doubt. Ryan chose a birthday cake over his own children's birth, and that single choice told me everything I ever needed to know about the shape of our marriage. If you've ever been abandoned in the exact moment you needed someone most, you already understand exactly what that hospital room felt like from the inside, and exactly why walking away calmly and completely was the only choice left to make.